meeting is being recorded.
All right, so can you see my screen? Great, so today I want to talk about flow, why it's an important concept in agility, and how we can manage it. So hopefully I can pique your interest to learn more about this. Now, flow, an interrupted movement or progress. So as you're familiar with the Agile Manifesto, the first principle that we have says that our highest priority is to satisfy customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software, which is, in other words, is the same as saying that we want to satisfy the customer through a flow of valuable software. And we can see other principles that are directly linked to the concept of flow, and other principles that are also linked to the concept of removing impediments to flow. But we're going to see a bit more. So we are all familiar with traffic, especially if you are in the tri-state area. We can all relate to that. So I used to work in Jersey City, and my commute time was anywhere from 50 minutes to 3 hours. So that was a very big variability, huge variability. And that variability didn't depend on the distance. It depended on the number of cars on highway, on I-78. So that number of cars on the road, that's what we call work in progress. People left their house, their homes, and they haven't arrived yet to the destination. It's the same as when we start working on a story, we haven't delivered it yet. Now, there wouldn't be a problem if there were 10, 20% of highway occupation with cars, but things start to get very busy when we approach 100% utilization. So if a highway is full of cars, as in the picture, no one is moving. The same happens with any type of service. The same happens with your team. So if your team is in this situation, it doesn't matter if you replace a programmer with a top developer in the world. You will be like sitting in traffic in a Ferrari. You are not going anywhere. So things start to get into the danger zone when we exceed 50% utilization, as you see here. And then the cycle times, or the service time to get to destination, increases geometrically. Now in traffic, you start seeing lines of cars when you approach tolls or intersections. That's the leading indicator that something might be wrong. Those lines, we call them queues. And queues can cause all type of problems. As we see here, of course, longer cycle time, more variability. That's why sometimes it took me 50 minutes. If there was an accident, it took me 3 hours to get to work. More overhead. It's not the same if I have to present a status about one project and if I have to present status about 20 projects for a longer period of time. It's a lot more overhead. Now, in software development, many of these queues are invisible. It's not like the line of cars or the line of these nice people dressed in red. Our queues are hiding in plain sight. So in software development, our queues are backlogs. Is waiting for approval, signatures, especially if you have those heavy ITIL processes, change management processes. Work start to accumulate in queues. No one is working on those, it's just sitting there waiting. Code that has been completed but has not been tested yet. Code that has been tested but not deployed, not released. All those are queues. that we need to manage because are leading indicators to future cycle time problems. So traditionally we manage timelines or schedules, but a more powerful approach will be to manage queues. So this is a classic book, Principles of Product Development Flow, by Don Reinertsen. In this book, Don lists 175 factors that have an impact on flow. Queues is one of the categories. And here in this slide, I'm just listing some sample of items in different categories. And you may recognize many items that are actually embedded in all of the Agile frameworks. For example, cross-functional teams is at the center of Scrum teams. We work in cadence, that we call them sprint in Scrum. When we have multiple teams, all the teams are synchronized. And that means that they start the sprint and they close the sprint on the same dates, because that will facilitate integration and coordination across teams. So face-to-face communication, that's also part of the Agile Manifesto. So as you see here, concepts are around flow. They are really permeating everything we do in agility. Now, Don Reinertsen guys took some principles from Lean, but other principles are from queuing theory and even from the military. Now, we won't have time to go over the 175 principles, but I just wanted to mention about some metrics, because you can only manage what you can measure. So the first one is throughput. It's about counting how many items we are delivering per sprint or per period of time. And it's about number of items, valuable items. It's not about points, because points have no direct relationship with value. Now, cycle time is the time to get to destination. So different software will calculate the cycle time differently, but it's usually from the moment you start working on an item until the time you stop working on the item. That's a short definition for cycle time. WIP, or work in process, is everything that you started but you haven't yet delivered. And you can see with this formula there is a relation between these three variables. This is called Litte's law. Never use a calculator to make these calculations, because there is some small print that makes this formula work. But it's important to understand the relation between the variables. If you want to improve cycle times, you need to either increase throughput, which is not easy, or you can manage a work in process that is very easy to experiment with. And you do that by setting limits, as in the image that we see here. This indicates that there is a limit of 3 items in this process, in the green process. Other metrics, common metrics, are arrival rate, which is number of requests from the business. If you get 15 requests per sprint and you're delivering 10 per sprint, you are in trouble. And the average age that we also see on this slide, this is an early indicator of problems, because you know the cycle time once the item has been delivered. But if the average age of the items is increasing, you can anticipate that your cycle times will increase as well. So with these numbers, you can create charts, you can visually see the trends, and with very quick calculations, you can even anticipate that, for example, here we see that 95% of the items are delivered in 13 days. So you don't even need to spend time with planning, with estimation. You can tell the business with a great degree of certainty that their items are going to be ready in 13 days or less. So I'm running out of time. I wanted to leave you with this summary and recommendation for these 3 books if you want to learn more. So remember, to manage for flow, you need to make the work visible, you need to prioritize appropriately, and manage handoffs between individuals, between teams, and control WIP to control queues. So I think we have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, we have, whoops, I'm going to change my background. We have 5 minutes for 5 minutes for questions.
All right, so let me know if you want to know anything more about these metrics or principles for flow.
Well, I would have one question, Fernando. Do you have a project where you use those metrics, and how does it work? How many metrics do you have?
Yes, absolutely. Right now I have a team where I use these metrics. For this team in particular, these metrics are more useful than velocity. They were having some problems with predictability initially, very long cycle times. And now I can, measuring this and making some training and some changes in how we prioritize work. We got to improve them dramatically in a short period. So we are still learning how to estimate, but really with these metrics it really doesn't matter. So velocity is useful for planning to establish capacity for the next sprint, but throughput is the number of valuable items you deliver every cycle.
So Fernando, I have a question as well. When you say it's the number of items that you count, say in terms of like software, would it be the features, or do you like break things into stories, or like what's the granularity that you go up to?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The question is about the granularity for the items. So yes, we do refinement. The only criteria is that when we do refinement, is that we need to make sure that this is doable in one sprint. That's our only criteria. And items are different sizes. But when you calculate these statistics, this type of statistics, you only need 10 items to calculate the statistics with 80% on confidence level. So in this case, I have twice the number of items. So I'm pretty confident that the statistics are going to be relevant. So yeah, some items are small, some items are bigger. But statistically speaking, they balance each other. And the only thing that you need to consider is that when you use this statistic, it's only going to be valid in a month that has the same context. So if everybody is going to be on vacation next month, these statistics are not going to be useful.
Makes sense. Thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm. All right. If we don't have any other question, then I think we can move to the next presenter.
This is great. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to pull up my.
Chapter's key?
Yes. In a moment. We are. Yeah. All right. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Sure.
Okay, outstanding. Okay. So my presentation, my quick presentation is, first, I'd like to thank Ken, Marla, Andre, and the entire Princeton Agility Coordination team. I truly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. So success is a team effort, and being on a winning team can be the envy of anyone, but not all teams are successful. And sometimes being part of a team can hold an individual back, which brings us to the question that we have this evening of, do organizations kill teams? So before we go too far into it, I want to share a few things about me. So on my journey, I've had a chance to pick up a couple of degrees and several certifications to include project management professional, project management institute, Agile certified practitioner, ProSci, organizational change management, and professional certified coach with international coach federations. Last year, I was recognized as one of the top 20 coaches of Washington, DC. And this year I released a book called Winning Teams Workbook, Taking Teams from Average to Exceptional, which became an Amazon #1 release and bestseller. On my journey, I've had an opportunity to get a lot of experience. And what I like to say is, when you don't get what you want, you get experience. And with some experience comes a lot of clarity. With every setback, with every failure, with every obstacle, I became very clear about why I needed to continue my journey. I found my why. I exist to support high-performing teams, delivering superior service. I partner with leaders and teams that are working under highly austere environments that are up against insurmountable odds. I help them to win on their own terms and by their own design. So to jump into our presentation, to give this some picture, some context, I want to share that I find a team story in everything I read, and I read a lot. And that kind of brings us to today's layout. We're going to talk about this first story, A Tale of Tragedy. So every day, highly motivated teams get formed, organized, and launched, only to quickly run into the brick wall. The brick wall shows up in many forms, from the tenuously overcomplicated processes and reporting structures to ever-changing priorities to obsolete and crippling ways of working together. Also, this was before we even had a pandemic, which now introduces such considerations as remote work, distributed team structures, and increased family stressors, along with increased reliance on what some would argue to be unreliable technology. So what happens? The term Great Resignation was coined by the US academic Anthony Klotz for the wave of pandemic resignations. With the trend continuing for more than several months now, it shows no signs of just being a blip. A study by the Pew Research found that resignation rates were higher among employees who worked in fields that experienced extreme increases in demand due to the pandemic, fields like technology, hospitality, and healthcare. This study also found that other major drivers of people leaving their jobs included things such as lack of an opportunity to advance, feelings of being disrespected, and also the lack of flexibility to choose when to put in those work hours. But along with tragedy, there is hope. And it's in some of the most unrespected places. So while many assumed that Melinda Gates was going to spend her billions with the Gates Foundation, the Wall Street Journal recently reported that Melinda Gates would likely be putting her wealth elsewhere. In 2021, in her giving pledge, she hinted to the shift in her giving philosophy in this one line. It's important that we place trust in people and organizations we partner with and let them define success on their own terms. So this approach requires letting go that most organizations aren't currently very good at or terribly interested in. But maybe they should learn to be. When we trust our teams and control is given and it's handed over, then amazing things can happen. Especially when you have team members who are wholly invested in their community's success, in their end user success. French Gates understands what many leaders don't right now. And that is that giving isn't about the giver, it's about the impact. In the same way that leading isn't just about the leader, it too is about the impact. And of course, we don't want to just hand over a large type of investment and these type of huge expectations to just any team, especially one that's not ready. Here are some indicators that you're working with a team that's ready for this type of increased trust and the loosening of control. They hold shared mental models. They optimize resources. They create mechanisms to cooperate and coordinate. And they find a way to connect and gain shared understanding so that they can maximize performance outcomes. So now for the story of unparalleled success. So for a moment, consider, what does it mean for your organization to achieve its version of unparalleled success? Is it finally achieving the level of maturity in Agile? Is it maybe leadership executing on its strategy effectively? But whatever the effort, take care of your teams and they're going to take care of your challenges. So one story of a great team is Google. And within Google, they had one of the best fourth quarters in calendar year 2021. They both had the revenue that blew past expectations and it rose 32%. Amid the great resignation, where many companies are trying hard to recruit and get new talent, they're receiving over 2.5 million resumes a year. They're currently valued at $300 billion, and their CEO has 93% approval rating on Glassdoor. But the big thing to remember is that these distinct achievements make it easy to miss that this is part of a highly thought out, analyzed plan and strategy of taking care of people and building a high performance culture. So several years ago, Google conducted an extensive research with an Aristotle project to answer the question, what makes an effective team at Google? They found that the best teams were effective because they worked well together, and regardless of who was on the team. The thought qualities these effective teams shared were: number one, having high psychological safety. Two, dependably working amongst team members. They were able to depend upon each other. They had a structure and clarity, specifically across roles and responsibilities. Four, they had a shared purpose. And five, they had an impact they were able to clearly see. People clearly understood how their day-to-day efforts improved people's lives. And so, why do I share these interesting, timely stories? And what does that tell us about leaders, teams, and organizational dynamics? The most important takeaway is that there's a shift in the way that teams need, and what teams need from leaders in organizations. Some of it's due to the pandemic, but other factors such as the need to feel respected and the need to feel like there's a distinct development path leading to advancement are organizational shortcomings that team members are just no longer willing to accept. So as we wrap up, I hope you take away these three key things: that great teams are hard to craft, but they're easy to break. We have to increase, when appropriate, increase trust and decrease control. And lastly, take care of your teams because they take care of your challenges. Here are the references. And any questions?
So question I have, yes, all of this is really great if your organization have money, right? So right now, at my company, like people are leaving, right? And people are leaving just mainly because they get a much higher salary somewhere. And everyone that work for me just say, hey, it's great to work here, but I got like 30% raise if I move, right? So as a startup, I don't have that much money to work with. Our company don't bring money. So, how are we gonna handle this?
So thank you. That's a great question. What I've found with most leaders is maintaining the relationship is extremely important, because you're right. Like, how do you compete with someone that needs, again, they're taking care of their families. And also part of that aspect of feeling respected is also feeling valued. So, if there is an addition, if that's what they need, then respecting that's something that individual has to do to find their own sense of happy, their own sense of self-actualization. But what we're seeing is that a lot of leaders let individuals go, but they don't maintain the relationship. Because you can get to this place that, is giving all this additional money, but then there's intangibles, things like that feeling of respect, that sense of community, that sense of connectedness. So as a leader, you're not just a leader within that organization. We have to think more globalistically about what it means to be a leader. Like, so leveraging technologies such as LinkedIn. So like, okay, if you're looking at additional opportunities that may provide you a greater development path than what you can find here, then I'm here to support that, not just for the organization's interest, but for the interest of my community and the interest of the profession. And therefore, let's make sure we're connected on LinkedIn. Do you need a recommendation? How can I help and support you in whatever your next step is? Because again, it's about that respect, and it's about finding a clear development path. And if you can't find it within your organization, leaders, you do have connections, just like what we did here today, like in offering different job opportunities and seeking out. That's the type of collaboration and support we want to do to make sure that everyone's winning.
Yep. Yeah. So the people who work for me, like they left, and then we still have connection, everything, still good friends. But at the end of the day, still company is hurting, right? Because people leaving, and then as a startup, we don't have that much money to accommodate for the individual. So
yeah, no, the onboarding piece as well, because okay, so there's that piece of the individual that's leaving, but it also means that there's increased hiring, there's increased onboarding, and you're decreasing the learning curve of people that are coming in. So making sure that those individuals are set up for success. Also making sure that they, that there's a good turnover left by the individual that's leaving. Exit interviews, I know a lot of organizations sometimes hit or miss with that, but that's extremely important to make sure that there's transitory things that are there for the individual that comes into their spaces. Because that's the one thing they're seeing, is that people are not necessarily just leaving wholesale out of the industries, they're moving to other places. They're trying to seek other opportunities. They're trying to gather new experiences. So, as someone's leaving your organization, they're leaving others and coming to you as well. So,
And Kai, in your experience, what is we are talking about money here, but are there other intangible, like, I guess, work flexibility and other stuff that can be negotiated to have a good team?
Oh, yes. Remote work has become a major thing that people are looking at. The flexibility of being able to do work on your own terms and when you want to do it, and having that flexibility is huge. And sometimes that's even more than than the pay. So try to seek out, when you're recruiting or when you're looking at different individuals coming into the organization, what is the thing that's most important to them? And partnering is just something that I feel like organizations had taken for granted, that everyone needs to have, this particular job to work for this, this company. It's an employee's market right now. And so being adaptive and agile in your HR is going to be huge. Don't leave people waiting too long for responses, making sure you're responsive to getting them onboarded. All right, and you see I'm got on red, so I'm gonna turn it over to our next individual. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you so much. Next presenter.
According to the list, you were up next, Phi or Fee.
Oh, I sorry, I never got a list. So I'm wondering, somebody gonna call my name. Okay, cool. Okay, let me share my screen. You can see my share screen?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. So today I'm gonna switch the atmosphere a little bit. So let's talk about technology. So today I'm gonna talk about infrastructure as code. So from time to time when we talk about DevOps, you probably hear this term infrastructure as code, and short for IAC. So what is it? Infrastructure as code is the way that we're managing and provisioning our infrastructure through code instead of manual process, right? So what I mean is manual process is like you have a dashboard and you go there, and if you say, okay, I need to have a new EC2 instance or a new Linux instance running, then I put some point and click, configure networkings and security, and create the resource, right? So that's manual. For automation, I just run a CLI command against some kind of configuration, and it's just one command, and I got here, voila, where I got a new Linux instance running somewhere on the cloud. So when we talk about infrastructure as code, it's most likely it's going to be applied to public cloud only. So public cloud means AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud, or some sort of other less famous cloud. However, some idea from infrastructure as code can be applied to on-premise, but it's they're not very trivial. Also, when we talk about infrastructure as code, there's idea of declarative or imperative, right? So declarative means like you have resources and you use the configuration and then you create it. Imperative means you have a series of commands, and at the end of those series of commands, then you have a target resource to be created. At the end of the talk, I'm going to give some example for the two type of infrastructure code. Also, we talk about push and pull. So push means that from your control computer, you push your configuration up into the public cloud. Versus pull means that you are at the public cloud and then you run the configuration that pull your resources over from the somewhere. Okay. So why we want to do infrastructure as code? Few idea here is because of speed and consistency. Right, so I give an example of create a new Linux instance in the public cloud. All right, so point and click, yes, at the end, you after a few minutes of point and click, you can create a new Linux. But if you have some sort of configuration already, you just run a command and then within a second, you can get that configuration. Secondly, you can consistently let's say if your organization need to have multiples of those Linux machines. So you can use this same configuration and create multiple of them, one for test, one for engineer, one for QA, from UAT. So they exactly the same configuration. And the only difference is like the uses of those. Also, you with the infrastructure code, you develop your resources as if you it's in the software development cycle. So any changes that need to be done to that resource, it will go to code and then have some other peer review, and then go into code check-in, and then at the end it will get deployed, mean it will get run and create the resource or change configuration that resource. Also, you can run security check on those configuration changes. Let's example, you create new EC2 instance and you only allow certain port number to be open. And then for any reason, a developer or someone open a port that violates that security, then the check is in play and identify it even before it get run and then create resource in the public clouds. Okay. Also, it will reduce management overheading, where we can create with infrastructure code, we can create self-serve, and engineers can do it. And in my orgs, I create a process where the engineer, if they need to have a new environment, they just like one or two command or click, then it's creating the whole environment needed for testing, right? And then last but not least on this is the ability to remove the resources when you no longer need it. Right, so with the manual creation, yeah, you can go and manually create several Linux server, but after you done, you tend to forget, or if you want to go back and say, hey, what did I create it? So it's really hard to remember to remove those resources. So with infrastructure code, we have a mechanism for running the removal automatically. Okay. There's some challenges for infrastructure code. The languages to use here. So most of the organization, you want to have the cloud agnostics. So it should work across public cloud provider like Azure or AWS. And then also it should be easy to learn and to maintain, so that when you're on vacation, somebody else can just manage it, right? And then as I talked earlier, the declarative, imperative, push or pull, you have to make a decision on this, which model is the best for your organization. And then when I do clean up the unused resources, and yep, so that the challenges that I ran into. So at MerPipe, this is what I selected. So we on AWS. So no doubt we just use the tool and the stuff that coming from AWS. Along the line with when I create the infrastructure code, I also keep in mind that stuff that I created can be used for other cloud, which is for example Azure. All right, so I could create the CloudFormation templates and then some scripting and then those get checked into GitHub. The languages that I use, Python and JSON. tool is AWS CLI and then serverless framework, because the majority of our code is in the serverless. Yeah, so use serverless framework for those. And also I use the hybrid between declarative and imperative. I'm coming from a full stack developer, so I'm still like kind of used to with code, writing code versus writing configuration. So I kind of having both in there, right? Most of the stuff that I did was to the push model, where I run the configuration from my laptop or from AWS code build, and that will push the resource, create new resource in AWS. Most of them are push model. However, I still have some small pull configuration. For example, from the Linux server, I use the pull model to get like Datadog agent, for example, right? So from that point, I have to run some script to go out to Datadog to get the Datadog agent. So that's a pull model. Okay, so I do have some sample code, and I have a little bit demo of, so I see I'm red. So you can reach out to me for sample code and the demo. Question?
Just what's an alternative to AWS? What's another?
So Microsoft Azure.
Okay.
And Google Cloud, but Google Cloud tend to be like a little bit harder to use compared to AWS or Azure. Other questions? Cool.
I have a question. Sorry if you...
Yes, Andrea. Yep.
When you mentioned the idea that other people can run the tool, have you been successful in training other people and having other people reuse?
So so I said reach out to me for demo, but quickly I'll show very quick on this.
Because my point is that many times someone developed a script or something that is useful, but it's a whole different story to have it adopted by other team members.
Right.
So that's where I'm coming from.
Right. So I create, so this DevOps create engineering stack. So this is run by the engineer, right? So when they need a new environment, they just run this. So just run this, and they put in just a branch in GitHub and the environment that they want to create and the application that they want to create, and click on the start build. Then that's voila, they have the whole environment. So just like this, and then they can do this many times, because at the end when they done, so let me showing some of the pipeline that they create. Right, so at the end when they done, they know that they will remove the stack. Right, and at the end of the sprint, I do some audit, and I do see if I see some pipeline that's still around, I just go ahead and remove them. So the process is very easy, and the engineer really love it.
Okay.
Oh, any other questions for Fee? Okay, our next speaker is Perry.
Thank you. So you've listened to presentations tonight about your favorite metrics about flow and organizational psychology and cloud infrastructure, but now I have your new least favorite, which is we're going to talk about feelings, something many of you would rather not do. So feel free to come back in 12 minutes if you don't want to hear this stuff. Now, I met Ken Roberts a couple weeks ago. I was giving this presentation, and it was very timely for a lot of people because, as you know, the world keeps getting weirder and weirder since 2020. So, yeah, we need sometimes to stop and talk about resilience and that sort of thing. So here's what we'll talk about today: not just definitions, where to come from, and so on, but also how do we get it wrong? And then if resilience is something that you want yourself or your team to cultivate, then now's the time to talk about it. So starting with, what is it? So let's go for, I guess, we'll jump to the bottom line here, which is the APA definition, American Psychology Association. What do they say about it? They say, well, it's the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, significant sources of stress, something like that. So a lot of people think, oh, that means you can bounce back. You can bounce back when something goes wrong. This is a naive and limited view, unfortunately. Like, it's a lot more than bouncing. Everyone else has their own definition and so on. There's many different versions of it. We just know that it's bigger than that. It's bigger than just one word, resilience and so on. So is it something we can use to stop ourselves from being locked into patterns of ineffective behavior or damaging behavior or something like that? Let's turn away from the mind and go to the dictionary. If you pick up a dictionary and you look up resilience, you're going to find out it has something to do with material science. So this is the ability to recover quickly from stress, is what they talk about. The idea originally came from material science when they were talking about something like clay or rubber. It's a property of a material to resume its original shape after distortion. So if we squeeze it, it bounces back. Okay, there's that bounce back thing again. The ability of a material to absorb energy and plastically deform without rupture, or the resistance to fracture when it's stressed. So that's that really describes Play-Doh and silly putty well as well. But the reality of it is, these concepts of it, they, whether we're talking about resilience, toughness, whatever, they share certain attributes, such as the ability to handle stress or strain. In reality, we tend to look at people who we call resilient, and we think that person is exemplary. They have these great traits that I should encourage and foster and imitate. If you've got a leader, you think that a leader has to be resilient. And same thing with the business. So traditionally, we've always thought of it as something to be admired, a resilient organization or a resilient community, someone who can stand the stresses of radical change and they don't give in to pressure, that sort of thing. So where's it come from? So if you have personal resilience, if someone you admire has personal resilience, where'd they get it? Where'd it come from? Did they just wake up with it one day? So maybe you've read that, you've heard terms like, oh, so-and-so is made of different stuff. They're made of tougher stuff. So in life, sometimes we know that people who are resilient, they seem to do better. They seem to meet the challenges better. They seem to weather setbacks more effectively. They handle failure better. They learn from it. So less well understood is the fact this is not something that you're born with. Nobody is. Like, if we go to a newborn ward a maternity ward in the hospital, and we say, okay, point to the most resilient baby here, you're not going to be able to do that. There's no indicator there that any of them were born with some genetic trait that makes them more resilient or something. It's more that it's something that's built. It can be built for anybody. It can be built from the inside out. Do some people seem to have a head start on that? Sure. It's just like, some of you picked up playing the piano very easily. I'm never going to be able to play the piano, or even if I try it for a long time, I might get up to a certain level, but it might not be as easy for me as it is for you. And it's the same way. It's a mixture of education and experience with that. It's a mixture of how you're wired and just if you have a natural talent for it. But it's not that you were born as resilient as you are now. It always has to be learned. It always has to be fostered. Sometimes the opposite can happen. Sometimes there's too much weight, too much stress, too much trauma happens, too much adversity, and that ends up removing somebody's resilience in the long run. But anyway, the good news is everyone can fortify it. There's a couple groups of people that the researchers found when they started looking at how do we foster this thing. And I know you all love a good 2x2 matrix, so I made you one. It's up here. We have the speed of recovery, because that's one of the key metrics of resilience. How fast do you recover from things? And the other is, what did you profit from it? Was there any value in what you went through? So in other words, did you learn from this mistake? Did you learn from this stress? And what we found are there are 4 types. Number one, there's people who can recover quickly, but they can't describe what they went through. They can't describe how they did it. So there's no real learning value in being one of those people or knowing one of those people. So the second group over here in the middle, just a little better. They're the ones who they can describe their ability to recover, and they also learn from the setback. So the first group, they might learn from it, or they might have just bounced back kind of instinctively. They can't really put into words how it was. The second group, at least they can describe it, but they've learned from it and they're probably not going to do it again. Then there's yet another group of people who have this ability to describe what they learned, and they can recover quickly at a reduced cost. So they're a little bit more resilient and so on. And that's a great thing to aspire for. And then there's yet another level out there. There's this further level wherein somebody who has an extreme challenge, and it's not a good challenge, it's not a good experience, and yet they're able to achieve a good outcome in the face of loss. They're able to turn it into an opportunity. We often refer to this group as those who experience post-traumatic growth instead of like post-traumatic trauma. So where does it go wrong? You know, this is stuff that we could all hope for more of, aspire to, we could foster, we could build, and so on. But where does it go wrong? There's a lot of misinformation out there. So I want to take a software design approach here. Let's break it so that we can fix it. So first of all, is more resilience always a good thing? And the answer is no. Like if we overload with it, there is something wrong with that. Resilience has this great ad campaign, right? We all strive for more. We all admire it kind of unilaterally, unconditionally. We never stop to think like, well, what if there's too much resilience? And so resilience is something that you need to sometimes experience stress in order to be motivated to change, in order to be motivated to grow. You need to feel those forces out there. So you might need to develop the motivation to overcome a challenge. And if you're not feeling any kind of discomfort because you're too resilient, it's actually going to hold you back. You're not going to want to move forward. You're not going to want to learn from anything if it doesn't hurt. Another thing is some people appear to have too much resilience and it ends up hurting their relationships. And these are people who recover almost too quickly from adversity. They actually, when they look at the brains, open them up, they find that in the left side of their prefrontal cortex, they give off too strong of a signal, which basically tells their amygdala, the center of your brain that tells you to fight or flight, tells you that you're in distress. It tells it quiet down. And it tells it quiet down a little too fast. And so people who are kind of more mainline, they'll see that someone else rebounds a little too quickly from stress, especially in relation to their emotion that others are feeling. And so when you have too much resilience, you can come across as a lack of empathy, that you don't really understand someone else's anxiety and not really comprehending their ability to respond in the same way. When you're like, why is everyone still upset about this? Like it happened 5 minutes ago. Why aren't we over this? You can come across as quite unempathetic and, like there's something like you don't understand their pain. So true resilience kind of has to be a balance between that rapid response and you have to process things at a certain depth as well. Then there's this other thing, this right now more than ever, this toxic positivity. We need to stretch our resilience muscle to navigate all the personal challenges, the societal madness, the professional challenges that you're going through, this new work environment that you found yourself in since 2020. So there's a misconception about resilience, which isn't helpful at all, which is number one, being overly optimistic. People who act like nothing's wrong, people who ignore the reality around them, causing stress and anxiety to everybody. There's also forcing yourself to be productive. That's the other half of that. Is like, why should I let my feelings slow me down? I'm just going to keep pushing through. People who say you have to be grateful at all costs. You're not allowed to express anything negative. My wife is a teacher. She's transitioning out of teaching because probably because of some people like this, but she had a fellow teacher one time when she was saying, oh, this is so terrible. We have to work all these extra hours. We have to, I don't even have a classroom anymore to keep my stuff in. So now I'm pushing a cart around. I have to go from classroom to classroom. And this person interrupted her and said, why are you complaining? You have a job. Like that was a moment of, oh, you should be grateful at all costs. You should never complain about anything. And then the last one is people who say this kind of positive vibes only, this, first of all, labeling some emotions as good and others as bad. There is no such thing as good or bad emotions. Yeah, some feel more positive, some feel more negative. There's a big trend now where there's a lot of factors telling us, no, you have to be calm and you have to be happy all the time. Happiness is not a default emotional state. So it doesn't mean that what people start getting out of this is they're told, like, if you're not content and happy 100% of the time, then something's wrong with you. No, our brain and body don't work that way at all. Sadness is an important emotion. It has meaning. It informs your mind and your body that you've lost something you cared about, something that you need to grieve for. Fear tells us that we're facing potential danger, that you, your mind, your body is not organized to handle yet. Anger is the one that speaks to us about the injustice in the world. I can't stress enough like the importance of listening to all those emotions, reflecting on what they're actually trying to tell you. But when you try to be happy at all costs, you won't give yourself permission to stop and reflect on what's actually going on. You won't learn anything from it. You'll suppress the messages your body, the important messages your body's trying to tell you, and eventually you're going to blow up or you're going to lash out. All right, so how do we actually do it right? Here, well, again, we're breaking it to fix it. So do we act like nothing's wrong? No. When a lot is obviously very wrong in the world, you try acknowledging the situation. Maybe try sticking to the facts. Don't catastrophize. Don't say, oh man, we're so screwed. Just stick to the facts. Rattle off the facts. Separate them from your opinions on it. Separate them from your feelings on it until you can get a handle on it. Instead of forcing yourself to be productive, think of, because that's like punishing yourself by being productive. It's like punitive therapy. Take the time to look after yourself too. You're not going to be able to force yourself to be productive for long. We're not built that way. Instead of forcing yourself to feel gratitude at all costs, understand that it is okay to not be okay. All these feelings of unhappiness come from comparison. So thinking that I should be less entitled to feel negative emotions or something, just because somebody else out there in the world has something worse going on, that's like saying, well, we both stepped in some doggy doo, but like yours was a bigger pile, so you have it worse than me. No, you both have it bad. Like it's all doggy doo. You don't want it on your shoe. You don't want it tracking across your carpet when you come inside. Like either way, it doesn't matter who has the bigger pile. It's all bad. It's all something that you're going through, and it's all worth acknowledging that it is not okay what you're going through. And then finally, telling yourself, that you can only see things positively. Instead of that, remind yourself that you are actually capable of holding multiple perspectives about uncertain or troubling situations. All of that is okay. All of those feelings are good. There's no such thing as bad feelings. All right, what's this got to do with Agile? Well, as a team member, I want to first of all accept that some things leave me frustrated and exhausted because they're out of my control. There's certain circumstances that aren't in your power. There's certain decisions that aren't in your power. And we sometimes have to disagree and commit, as Amazon said, or as the rest of us say, sometimes you have to let go of them and move and focus your energy more positively. Embracing change, how much are we pushing this all the time? We're change agents, right? There's always going to be change. It's the only constant in life. So instead of concentrating on the disruptive part of it, focus on being flexible, focus on taking a flexible approach and accepting that it can be a fundamental part of your life and it can bring opportunities and it can bring positive outcomes too. Stay focused on the big picture instead of focusing on the details of stuff. Again, avoid catastrophizing. Focus in on the actual real facts in front of you, the most realistic if you can. Impact. Looking at it from a broader perspective that can really help you more accurately assess its significance. And then finally, this maintaining a positive attitude. Maintaining a positive attitude doesn't mean ignoring the reality in front of you. It doesn't mean that you have to have positive feelings about negative situations either. It just means if something's going wrong, then you still believe that you can and will do your best to deal with the situation and move forward, and that you always did your best in the past, given the tools you had. Your brain is one of those tools. All right, so the last best practices before I wrap up. I'm sorry if I'm a minute over, but number one, and a major component of resilience is this one here. They found in the 1950s, psychologist Julian B. Rotter said, people who are resilient have a firm internal locus of control. They believe that they are in control of their own lives. Reaching out to people, building relationships, we're big on that at Agile. Facing the fear, this is something from every politician to every athlete. They're scared. They get stage fright. They get pre-competition jitters. So instead of letting it overwhelm you, use that adrenaline as a way to fuel your competition. They use the term dare to compete. So in other words, you're afraid to compete, but compete anyway. Let's see. I want to skip to this one. This is an awesome one that came from Hillary Clinton's masterclass. And so whether you like her or not, you have to admit, no one's ever absorbed, or very few people will ever have to absorb as much criticism as Hillary Clinton. And she's developed a great outlook on it, which is take it seriously, but not personally. So in other words, work on extracting the lessons from the feedback you get without drawing the harmful conclusions about yourself or the facile conclusions about yourself. Take into account where it's coming from. Why did they criticize you? Did they have their own agenda? Do they have any investment in your success? Or is it something else they're pushing? And then maybe don't take their criticism criticism so seriously. And then last, even if you do everything right, know your values, build the resilience, overcome your fear, get in the game and take criticism well. You're still going to face obstacles. So that can be the cost of ambition, the cost of success. So the goal isn't to avoid obstacles, it's to understand how they came about, reflect on them, learn their lessons, and reinvent them as opportunities, just like we do with any impediments. And what I mean by this last one, I'm going to post a link to a Google Drive document in the slideshow. It's just a little professional inventory you can do for yourselves. Make a copy, fill it out. It's got nothing to do with me. I won't see what you write. It's just something you can bring with you next time you end up going into a situation where you need to carry resilience. Okay, that's all I've got. What are your questions? I just saw your time message now, so I'm sorry for running over. There's a Google Drive link. Okay, I guess I'll be followed by Steve. He's going to talk about feedback. Thank you.
Actually, Steve was initially going to speak. Dr. McGee is going to. So first of all, thank you, Perry. That was excellent. Thank you for that. And just want to double check there are no questions for Perry. Great. Namita, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. And then our final presenter tonight is Kai. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Great presentations all around us after this evening. So today, the final thing I'd like to speak to you about this evening is decreasing leaders' learning curves and eliminating their blind spots. So just take a moment. First off, just give yourself a hand, a wink in the mirror, just applaud your efforts for coming out this evening and in the midst of everything that's going on, that we all have going on, just taking this time for yourself to develop, to learn, to be social, and to bring some light to others' day. So in this presentation about decreasing leaders' learning curves, we're going to discuss the actions that we can take to decrease our learning curves or our leaders' learning curves, and also eliminate blind spots. At the end of our discussion, you're going to be able to understand important things to consider when you're working with leaders and teams to decrease their learning curve. You'll also be able to articulate the difference between the ideals and the realities of the learning curve. So the major thing with the learning curve is that it's a correlation between the learner's performance and the number of attempts that are required. So while we'd like to believe that every time we pick up a new habit, a new behavior, that we're going to nail it 100% the very first time we do it to perfection, that's usually not the reality that most humans experience. The learning curve theory tells us that we as learners become more efficient and improve over time by doing the thing that the new habit, by performing the new ritual. And it goes further to apply to the leader's learning curve. So as leaders, where it's important to consider, as you're becoming a leader and you want to get better in terms of your performance, your impact, your influence, you have to have continuous and consistent engagements. And it's also interesting to consider this in terms of the context of remote work and distributed teams. Like, how are leaders leveraging those engagements that they need to get to become better in their impact and their influence, and doing this to develop themselves? How are they mentoring, developing, and engaging and showing that executive presence virtually or in situations such as a pandemic, a once in a lifetime for some extraordinary, impactful event in their lives? So as we talk about the leadership learning curve, a couple of things that we want to consider is that, you think of the ideal versus the reality of how this learning curve works. Like for many leaders, even if you don't expect to get everything right the first time, you never expect to learn the same lesson twice. You never expect to revert back to an old behavior. And you typically never expect to serve, to grow complacent and stagnant on your learning journey, but it does happen. And so let's say you're working with leaders and you're noticing this, so as a servant leader, as a coach, as a manager, team member, like what can you do to help? So here's one of the suggestions from the book, Toyota Kata Practice Guide. It outlines 4 steps to improve the continuous growth and development. They'll decrease the learning curve in a phenomenal way. First, you understand the direction that you want to go. Set your goal. You assess where you are currently in your current position. Third, you determine that future aspirational state or your target condition. And in fourth, you iterate, making small, consistent progress towards the target condition. And so oftentimes this Kata learning curve requires some challenging of one's current mindset and facing certain obstacles, and also letting go of certain habits along with the adoption of some new, more suitable habits. So here you see the individual encountering obstacles and lack of knowledge, certain things that you'll encounter as you're going through and improving your improvement cycle. And as they're addressing their new behaviors and their thinking, they're finding that, as you can see in number 4, they take an approach of experiments. So in this case, when you're using experiments, you never fail in an experiment. The only thing you do is you learn from the validation of a long-standing hypothesis or an assumption. So it's not a win or lose, it's a win or learn type of scenario, which makes a lot of leaders more understanding and more engaging into the process. It's more amenable to the learning. This is a kata, this is an experiment. What is something that we could do differently to allow you to reach the space to where you'd like to be? So next, we also have a couple of questions. So on the left, you see the simple kata. So you can also use this as like a front and a back of a card. So some questions for the leader that will help the leader as they're working through their katas are provided on your left. The 5 questions that will help you establish your goals and your measures of performance and effectiveness, those are going to be on your left side. And then the reflection section is where you're going to take time and to take stock of your journey. What have you gained and what have you learned so far? So both of those are extremely important. It's amazing how many people, they have an inkling or an abstract idea of what they want, but really getting clarity around what it is that they'd like to achieve for themselves, for their development, for their organization, for their team, is essential to the ability to be successful at achieving those things. And then also taking routine time to reflect around how that journey is going. So when it comes to decreasing the leader's learning curve, number 1, continue to check in. If this is a leader that you're working with, continue to check in. So you mentioned last time we talked, you were working on this, how's that going? Or also do self check-ins. If this is something that, I'm certain we're all on that journey of self-improvement, self-development, making sure that we're have a greater self-awareness. So do that. So check in with yourself, check in with the people that you're responsible for development, or you have a concern or a interest in ensuring they're successful. Also practice that level of engagement, whether it's working on your virtual leadership presence, executive presence, or working through different organizational challenges, all of engaging is going to help. That's where you get the opportunity to get that experience and opportunity to experiment and iterate around improvements. And then lastly, never stop. Never stop. It's not a set destination. It's a continuous learning, evolution, and growth. cycle. So part 2, next we'll look at how we overcome those blind spots. In this powerful quote from James Baldwin around, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Is extremely important on so many different levels. Recognizing that, nothing can be changed until it is actually acknowledged. So in a study conducted by Levin, they determined several leadership blind spots. And number one among them was going it alone, not reaching out, not seeking partnership, not getting additional perspectives, being insensitive to the behaviors effect on others. Like what you may be doing will have impact on others, how it is perceived, how it is observed, how it lands is huge. Also, having an I know attitude, that there's nothing more to be learned. You've already know all there is to know about a particular subject, a person, a situation, and not recognizing that everything is constantly evolving. People, situations, and circumstances. And then avoiding those difficult conversations, ignoring the fact that there's some really challenging things that people are facing, that organizations are facing, that teams are facing, and thinking that your silence doesn't speak volumes. So most of the biggest thing, and I'll give you a moment to read some of the rest, but one of the biggest things here is you recognize that there's a sense of lack of self-awareness, recognizing how intimately connected we are, our behaviors, our interactions, our engagements are with other human beings. People change people, not situations, not organizations, not abstracts, but people and how we work together. So, and it brings me to this interesting story that we've all probably familiar with, and so in addition to the circumstances and environments that leaders may experience, they may find that there's no aspect to shine a light on these blind spots. So a great example could be found in the children's book, The Emperor's New Clothes. So how many of you are part of an organization that perpetuates a culture where leaders can go around content in the illusion that they're doing a great job leading their organizations and teams? The nobles were surrounded by great and smart individuals that meant well. However, they did not feel safe to speak truth to power. And even if it was for the leader's benefit, and let alone for the organization's benefit. So lastly, the truth ultimately gets revealed by a child, by a new team member, by an audit team, or a Washington Post article. Ways that we can help leaders identifying blind spots. We can look at, there's some forms of coaching engagement, leading, which is ultimately leading with curiosity. So the structure of this type of grow conversation, where you're looking at goals, reality, options, and a way ahead, you ask one or two questions specifically to these particular areas. In goals, you ask, again, essentially, what is it that the individual would like to take from this situation? With realities, what are the things this individual is working with? What are the limitations? What are the true realities? Is it that you're getting outbid by other organizations because they can afford to pay more on employees? Those are some of the realities that exist. How might someone else see this situation? Then you look at options. What are some things that you can do? Understanding what the realities are, what options do you see for yourself? What experiments can you run? And then looking at a way ahead, making a decision so you can take an action so that you can get a result, and then you learn and make another decision, take another action, get another result. Some of the aspects of this type of coaching technique, you want to ask powerful questioning, but powerful questioning is mostly questioning where you're present and you truly listen for that, what the individual is saying, what they're not saying, and you're fully engaged into helping them with a heart of care and a heart of candor. And then leading us to radical candor, just recognizing that caring personally and challenging directly is something that Kim Scott recommends in her book. So it's essentially being in a place of care, meaning like you really do want this individual to be successful, and they know that it's not just a general, there's already a relationship that exists of trust, of someone feeling like you have their best well-being in mind, and then you telling them a truth that may not be comfortable in the present, but will ultimately help them to grow. And then also partnering with them and being a resource as they decide what next steps they want to take. So let's say you're also a leader and you don't, and you're trying to figure out like, what can I do personally to increase my awareness? So soliciting feedback the right way. So ask for one piece of feedback at a time, like considering, talking with someone that you trust. Also surround yourself with diverse thinkers. It will likely show up and they will provide you that feedback. So having the confidence to surround yourself with people that may have a different opinion may help to broaden your perspective. Identify the triggers. This goes back to a self-awareness, like what situations cause you to shut down? What situations cause you to open up, or do you seek to engage in? And recognizing that about yourself. And giving yourself a good balance of both, those that you are very comfortable going into and those that you may not feel quite comfortable with. And then also seeking out your blind spot buddy, someone that you trust, that you can get that care and that you know that they care for you and that they'll be candid. Getting that person's perspective and kind of seeking them as that gut check or that azimuth check on making sure that you're going in the right direction. And with that, here are the references for this presentation. And let's stay connected. So what questions can I answer for you this evening?
Just wanted to comment because I use that Emperor's New Clothes joke a lot when we're talking about in waterfall systems, how, you're in phase 3 or 4 or something and something's going terribly wrong and nobody wants to be the one to raise the bad news because they're now going to be the one that everyone thinks of like, oh, we wasted all that time and those resources and that budget building something. And now we have to start over because so-and-so had to open their mouth. That's the fear that people have. And it's similar to that Emperor's New Clothes phenomenon. So I was glad to see that.
It's part of our onboarding tools with our team. Like that one page, just a summary of that story, because we want to be able to feel comfortable to have those conversations. Also,
yes,
road to
the
Abilene.
importance of transparency, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And also Road to Abilene. That's another good one. If you haven't, like you can Google it's on YouTube. And it's along the similar lines. It's a family that ends up going on this long trip to Abilene, and ultimately no one really wanted to go. And so you're constantly using analogies to help teams see that, we're in a safe space, or we want to create it.
I have a question.
Yes.
This related to our earlier conversation about keeping individuals, right? So from the item number 7 here, right, tolerant good enoughs, right? So quite some time I see that my team members, they just do good enough, but I didn't have a gut to say, hey, you got to do more, just because I'm afraid that that individual will go out and look for another job. How do you handle this situation?
Gotcha. So question, like what type of relationship do you have with these individuals? Is there a trust in where they could receive that feedback? Because I guess also too, is just like, okay, there's 2 reasons people don't come to you with the challenge, with the issues that they see regarding you. And that's number 1, they either feel like you're not competent enough to deal with them, or that you don't care to deal with them. So I always use that when I'm thinking, okay, I know this individual is competent. I know this individual cares. They didn't wake up or get to this space in their career where they didn't want to get feedback. So like being able to give examples, do it in a way that's where it's almost like a grow conversation of, okay, you know, here's something that I've recognized that, you know, we could probably, an opportunity for improvement. Like, what are some of the realities you see with this? Is it training? Is it time? Like, how does the organization support us to getting this outcome? Sometimes it could be as simple as just awareness. Oh, I didn't realize you wanted that. So most people can, you know, they can give you anything. They can't give you everything. So asking for what you want all the time, but also being willing to, and then being willing to negotiate. Is something I recommend with leaders as well as employees.
Yep.
It sounds like you've got an interesting team. They're in a space where there's a lot of just, gosh, what is it? Some crucial conversations that would be helpful to have.
Yep.
And just, but there's also some assumptions that you may be having around those team members. The idea that maybe some are fragile to receive the feedback or might turn away, or it might damage the relationship.
I'm just afraid that damage the relationship, right? Because right now, but my team member, they share everything, right? So if the guy just go out and looking for a new job, he will tell me, right? So by bringing the harsh conversation, I was afraid of damaging that relationship, right?
But what's the trade-off of not telling them? And I don't know. See, I'm going to get your information. We're going to.
Yep, sure.
I'm seeing the.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, I'll just say, I know we have things time boxed and everything, but I don't want to limit the conversation. So I'm putting up the red out of due diligence because we said we time box everything. But if this could be a benefit for everyone to hear, then I think we can continue. Unless Namita, I don't know if we have more after this.
After this, just a conclusion.
Okay. So I'm going to
Talk about
remove
it.
the red background.
So, I mean, if you don't mind, like, Fee, can we spend like another 2 minutes on it? Sure. All right. So tell me a little bit about this particular individual. So the conversation that you're going to have is around delivering some feedback that may not be taken well by the individual.
I'm not sure yet, right? But that individual and I, we have a really good working relationship.
Okay,
Right.
good. Then it sounds like if you have trust with the individual, this could be a coaching opportunity. So identifying because you have your truth. What's one question that you might have for that individual around the situation? I mean, it could be as simple as, so, you know, I've observed this. What do you think? Or I'd like to understand a little bit more about this approach. Can you share? Can you tell me, can you help educate me? What is the thing what's the question?
So for the past 3 sprints, right? That's particular user story getting carried over from one sprint to another sprint to another sprint, right? So I'm trying to get a way of, because I always come up with a really good excuse that, okay, it's getting carried over because of this, because of that. And I know that individual worked really hard, right? To try to get it done, but maybe it's not good enough.
Okay, well, this actually sounds like one of those situations of maybe a fire, focus, or faith. So fire being that sense of urgency, like, is this a highest priority item? Do they recognize it as something that, does it have a time box? Does it have a deadline? Does it have a dependency that is holding up something else? So the fire around it, the focus, like, are they focusing on other things? Like, do they know that this is the main thing? Like, all the other things that you're delivering may not be as valuable or hold the same level of business value as this one critical area. And then lastly, that faith, like, what is their belief system about this? Do they believe that, hey, this is something that's negotiable? It's, you know, it gets done when it gets done. And, you know, and my boss is fine with that. So as a leader, sometimes you get what you create and you get what you allow.
Right.
So kind of thinking around, okay, are there other things that you're focused on? Are there other things that the project may be looking at?
And this is Joe. Can I add something to you? I'm
Yes.
just going to be less eloquent than your the way you described it, but you can shape the context around if this individual, if your concern is this individual is not going to take this criticism or coaching well, then put in the context of what this individual wants to do in the organization. In other words, is their goal to step up a level or to develop other skills? Shape the criticism around, well, if you want to get to, you know, from A to B, these are some of the capabilities, and these are the approaches you would need to take, and use the examples of the creative criticism, you know, what they may be as shortcomings as the things that they would need to improve to get from A to B. My 2 cents. Again, less eloquent than Kai's.
Yep.
I love that. And also, like, just a real quick, like, opening the floor, like, because I know there's right here amongst us, we've got years of experience. Who, you know, what are some other thoughts?
Sounds like you have the relational credibility you need to have this conversation. They're willing to be really honest with you. I bet they're willing to take it the other way. I used to be a youth pastor. And one of the things I learned about that is, like, people assume that children and teens don't like discipline. But the truth is they thrive under discipline. If they don't have discipline, they don't actually feel loved or taken care of. And I wonder if this would actually improve your relationship by coming up with these guidelines or specific expectations. They might say, okay, yeah, he really cares about me and the work I'm doing. And, you know, sandwich all of this with, like, love and care and you know, compliments, which I'm sure you have many for this person. And I think you'd be able to handle that swimmingly.
Got
I
it.
agree with that. And, you know, I would come at this from a completely different angle and just think out of the box on this. And I would say that, you know, from the standpoint of people leaving, you know, for money and what have you. So in my experience, that's very common for younger people of any generation to do that.
Yeah.
You want to get your money up as much as possible until you hit the asymptote, which always happens in engineering, which is why most engineers, or many engineers, go back and get an MBA. You're not going to find many people after a certain amount of experience that are still coding anymore. I dare you to find them. They go into other areas, but usually some form of management or leadership. And they're usually forced out because it's very difficult to compete against people who just came out of college and have been spending the last 4 years with the newest technologies. So I would ask that you think out of the box and say to yourself, well, who would really enjoy working for me? So look for people who are, let's say, more experienced, who maybe are in a pool of a bunch of people that are laid off, who would appreciate being given the chance to have a job. Because I can tell you from speaking with recruiters that there's sort of this informal rule that, you know, if you've been out of work for a certain amount of time, they throw away the resume. I know this from speaking to so many recruiters. So there's all kinds of things like that that go on that you're not told about. But if you speak with enough recruiters, and someone is actually honest with you, you'll actually find all of this information out. So I would say, look for people who are going to appreciate having a job. Maybe somebody wants a part-time job because, there's other things going on in their life. Maybe they need to take care of somebody. So maybe they only want to work 20 hours a week, but they really appreciate having that job, so they'll work even harder. Or maybe you're only paying them for 20 hours, but in reality, they're putting in 40 or 50 because they're working at night after dinner to make you happy because they appreciate the job. Maybe you have holiday parties. Maybe you take them out to lunch on a quarterly basis. None of these large companies are going to do these type of things. So there are other things that people appreciate. Maybe you have a policy where if you need a day off, you just give them the day off and you pay them for it. And instead of counting the hours, you look at the results. So you say, hey, I had somebody come up to me, I had a conversation about this, and I said, most people are clock watchers. I said, but if you look at people working from home on a remote basis, a lot of those people you'll see working after dinner, and they're doing that because they're so thankful that they can work from home, because that makes their lives so much easier than having to commute to a job. So there's other things that if you're going to try to compete, you have to think that way. Because if you're going to try to compete for all the stars in their cars, you're going to have to pay a lot of money for those people, and they're not going to be loyal because that's all they're going for is the money. So that's my suggestion. You need to look in different places than the standard recruiter does.
Thanks, everyone. We really crowdsourced that one. Sophie, how did we do? You got some good stuff?
Yep, we got some good stuff. I can apply on.
Awesome, awesome.
Thank you guys.
By the way, with respect to looking for people who are maybe good, but maybe have been out of work for a while, here's a good tip. I believe that you can go to any state and register with their unemployment. And I think within that unemployment, people, I think if you're unemployed, you usually have to sign up these days with the state. It's required, I think, any state where you have to sign up in order to get the unemployment benefits, you have to sign up with their state systems. So I don't think a lot of employers know this, but they can go in there and search for people who put their resumes up on there. And I can almost, I would just think that somebody that's unemployed and is having a problem finding a job, I would think they're going to be way more appreciative of having the job versus, oh, I'm making 200,000 a year. I don't think those people are going to think that way.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. And it also looks like Ken had a comment or a question.
Yeah, actually, I kind of had a question for Kia to earlier conversation. Like, one of the organizations that I'm working with is a not-for-profit, and they've got a high turnover rate because, they're not paying a lot, right? The not-for-profit doesn't have a lot of money. They bring young folks in. So I don't know. Is there anything that you've found that is particularly successful in like the not-for-profit organizations to help them with things like retention and getting people in the door?
So that would actually be a page out of Google's playbook. So like those 5, and actually I'll make sure I update the slide deck. Like, I'm not sure if we get a chance to send these out to you guys, but if we can, I will make sure that you get those. But those 5 things that Google did, specifically impact, being able to draw the lines of where that person's contribution shows up for people's lives and improving what they can do. Everything from having hearing back from the people who are receiving the benefits from what individuals' work is occurring, and then also branding. So those things of not so much as just like the mission and the vision, but like, what is your motto as a team? What is, and some of those intangibles of making sure that you're meeting and spending some time with the group, you know, maybe a quarterly dinner or luncheon or something like that to give them a sense of community. That's one of those big things that, you know, really resonates, especially with millennials and Generation Z. They demand it. They demand to see how their day-to-day contributions are feeding the bottom line, whether it's profit, not for profit or nonprofit. But those things of being able to say, you know, here's what we do, here's who we are, here, we're your tribe, we're your community, is very powerful.
And adding to that, there are companies out there that I've seen, they're rare. But for instance, if you don't have a lot of money, I think this is totally awesome. You work for the company and the owner can get an independent assessment made of what the value of the company is. And you give them like sort of quote unquote fake stock. So they're actually owners of the company. And, you know, and when you retire or whatever, you know, you may be given like a certain value based on another, as time goes on, independent assessment. But if you quit, you have to send those shares back. And I don't know all the legalities of it, but I have seen, I think they're called employee-owned companies. So, I mean, probably just Google employee-owned companies. There's quite a few of them out there, but I mean, they are rare.
Wawa's like that.
Oh.
Ken, one other thing from my youth pastor days is like most of my team were volunteers, and so there was no budget at all to pay anybody. And my best volunteers I got after I was kind of going through this approach of like asking for very little from my volunteers. Like if I just get a lot of volunteers, they all do like little things. Everyone, you know, many hands make light work kind of approach. Then I kind of like heard the story where like, no, if you ask, a lot of times you're not asking enough from these people. They need a vision for something to spend all that time on, not just, you know, pushing papers and things like that. Like they really need to see what you're building, why it would help the world, and what they could get out of that personally, that they wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. You know, because it's a different kind of organization.
Also, I was saying, like, you become a transformational leader. That's that individual that takes them to something bigger than themselves. You're part of this major movement, kind of along the lines what Matthew was saying. Like, you are the evangelist for this. Like, your level of excitement, enthusiasm, and passion for the work is extremely contagious. And then also, acknowledgement is huge. I spent 20 years in the military, and I still have certificates from volunteer things, and it means a lot to me to know that, you know, it was appreciated, and also to kind of look back on some of the ways that I was able to contribute. So those are also some good areas.
I always use, when I speak to my teams, exactly what you just said. My favorite metaphor is talking about Navy SEAL teams. You know, there shall be no person left behind. Anytime I can find a television show or a documentary based on Navy SEALs, I am always astonished at the level of loyalty that those people have to each other. And I always give that metaphor to my teams because that is what I think we should all aspire to. I know we'll never get to that because it's a job, but I want it to get to as best as possible.
Well said. think we got about 5 minutes. Anyone, anything else? This has been so amazing, guys. Man, we've like crowdsourced. Like, if you know, gosh, we could just get together on Thursdays and do this. I feel like we.
Yeah, well, we've got these going on monthly. Feel free to keep coming. We do,
I will.
yeah, we do lean coffees as well as lightning talks, as well as speakers. So it's really a great opportunity with lean coffees to get in and get into the conversations, go deep. It's good
It's
stuff.
an amazing community you guys have built. So kudos to your entire team. It doesn't happen by coincidence.
Yeah, and really, really, really grateful because I've been kind of out of pocket for the last 2 months for various personal reasons. And I am extremely appreciative of Marla and Andrea and Namita and everybody that's on the organizing team. There are others that I'm not mentioning, but I really appreciate all the effort and time that you folks have put in to make this work tonight. So from my heart, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. And of course, thank you to all the speakers and the attendees. As we mentioned before, we do have an upcoming event on April 27th with Veronica Roth from Elevate, who will be joining us. And try to join our Slack channel. We post jobs and like events and things like that. So would love to get some engagement there. And yeah, keep in touch. Thank you so much for attending today.
Thank you.
Yes, actually, I
Thank
have
you.
an announcement it is posted on Slack, and I told the gentleman who posted it that it would be mentioned. There is an upcoming upcoming conference, and there is a coupon to have attend the conference for $25. So the details are on Slack, and the coupon is expiring tomorrow, end of March. So it's a tight schedule. If you don't make the deadline, it will be $200. So if you're interested in the Philly Tech conference, just look up Slack and you will see the details.
Yeah, they've got like, I'm trying to avoid spending money right now on conferences because I've got this FOMO thing that I'm trying to fight. But they've got Cory Doctor, they've got Linda Rising who's speaking, and she could read the dictionary. I'd be listening to her. So yeah, well worth attending with some of those speakers.